What does the War of 1812, uprising Native Americans, and the legendary Johnny Appleseed have in common? Stay tuned. Hey guys and gals, it's your buddy Drew with Living History's Mysteries and Ferocious Feline Productions. What does the War of 1812, an Indian uprising, and the legendary Chapman, Johnny Appleseed, have in common? The year was 1812. And it was the middle of the Ohio Territory here in the Midwest. Johnny Appleseed, a pacifist, a lover of everything, found himself entangled in the War of 1812. And it wasn't until all the blocks started falling into place that he was actually a volunteering member in this situation. Check this out. This is good.
When we think of a frontier hero, we might think of someone like Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, or Kit Carson, roaming the wild wearing a buckskin shirt carrying a long rifle. These were hard men, often carving out a legacy through violence. They were often soldiers and great hunters. One of the people we talk about in this video is a more wholesome and gentle figure compared to the other adventurers we often hear about in the American frontier. He wasn't a soldier, as he was strictly non-violent, and wasn't a hunter since he didn't even eat meat and allegedly loved all living things. He built his legacy with sacks full of apple seeds, some farming tools, and fragments of religious texts from the Swedish Christian mystic Emanuel Swedenborg. It's not exactly dime store novel material. He was more the subject of children's poems and stories. The man's name was John Chapman, but most know him from his folklore persona, Johnny Appleseed. He planted apple nurseries throughout the heart of Ohio and sold them to incoming settlers from around 1806 to mid-1820s. Between that time, the War of 1812 shook the old Northwest, and that is where the story begins. This is certainly not a children's story, as it involves the violence that's all too familiar on the frontier in the early 19th century. Chapman was something of a scout in the later half of 1812. He often roamed around to tend to his orchard, so some settlers decided to pay him for any information on the whereabouts of redcoats and hostile natives. While traveling up north around Lake Erie, he spotted 9 ships crossing the lake towards the mouth of the Huron River. He rushed southward back into Ohio, shouting at every settler and cabin in his path. "Flee for your lives," he yelled. "The Canadians and Indians are landing at the Huron." The settlers packed up in a panic and rushed to the nearest blockhouse, fearing a full-on invasion. Chapman continued southward towards Mansfield until a rider brought the latest news. Turns out those ships weren't British. They were American ships, sent back to the States after General Hull's surrender at Detroit. Chapman's scouting job may have been a bust, but he sure knew how to spread the word. In the coming weeks, though, the threat would become real. Near Mansfield, Ohio, where Chapman owned some property, there was a community called Greentown. It was made up of a few Lenape clans, and along with some other groups of natives who were displaced after the American Revolution. To the settlers, they were known as the Greentown Delawares. The population was about 150 people, and they farmed, raised livestock, and traded with their white neighbors. It was an uncertain but mostly peaceful coexistence. The local militia and U.S. forces, however, did not trust the Greentown Delaware. Colonel Samuel Kratzer was tasked with moving the local native communities to West Ohio, closer to an Indian agency where they can be watched. The intent was to keep distance between the neutral tribes and the influence of Tecumseh's Confederacy. Colonel Kratzer assigned Captain Douglas and his militia to evacuate Greentown, peacefully if possible. As you could probably imagine, the natives were happy. They asked Peter Kinney, a friendly settler, to reason with the militia on their behalf, which he did. But when Kinney wouldn't budge, Douglas drew his sword and threatened him. Apparently he was ready to strike him down, but didn't want to draw blood in front of the Delaware. Douglas decided to negotiate with another settler, Reverend James Copus, who had been friends with the Greentown community for years. Copus also strongly objected to their removal, saying that they had been neighborly and treated him quite well. Douglas threatened him too. Orders were orders, and if Copus did not cooperate, he would be held for treason. The captain told Copus to use his influence to convince the Greentown natives to leave, and assured him that they would be protected. Copus spoke with Thomas Armstrong, who was said to be a mixed native and white chief at Greentown. They had become friends ever since Copus started preaching there about 3 years prior. Copus convinced them that they were being evacuated for their own safety and that it was only temporary. After the council was held, the Greentown Delaware reluctantly agreed to move west with an escort of soldiers in early September 1812. Copus, along with 3 of his sons, were present when the militia herded the inhabitants out of Greentown. When the Delaware and the troops were out of sight, a few militiamen straggled behind and ransacked the village. It's said that they urinated on the floor of the council house and burnt the town to the ground. The Copus family is horrified. From a distance, the Delaware could see the smoke rising above the trees. Many would break off and end their neutrality, stepping onto the warpath. Among the Greentown evacuees was a small family who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. A Wyandotte man named Toby and his 12-year-old daughter happened to be in the neighborhood. They didn't live in Greentown, but were there to visit some friends and possibly do a little trading. The militia likely saw them as just a couple more Indians and rounded them up along with the rest. When they camped south of Mansfield, Toby and his daughter made a run for it. A couple soldiers shot at him and reported the escape. The girl managed to get away, but she was forced to leave behind her father, who was hit and laid bleeding next to a creek. 2 soldiers were sent to search for the fugitives. One of them was an admitted Indian hater who recently lost a brother to an ambush. They came across Toby, who was still alive but fatally wounded. He tried to reason with the soldiers, explaining that he wasn't supposed to be with the Greentown Delaware and that he was a friend to the white settlers. This fell on deaf ears, as he was just another savage to him. One of the soldiers took Toby's tomahawk and buried it into his skull. They then removed his scalp and decapitated him. Witnesses say the soldiers made his scalp into a whiskey sack and passed it around, sharing a drink from their ghastly trophy. The creek where Toby was killed is now known as Toby's Run. After the removal and destruction of Greentown, the Delaware were out for blood. First, they attacked and killed the Zimmer family and their neighbor, Martin Ruffner, who tried to warn them of the war party roaming about. The settlers around Mansfield, in a panic, took shelter in the blockhouse. Among them was the Copus family. James Copus feared that he was a target. Though he was innocent of deceit, he was guilty by association. He and his family waited in the blockhouse for several days, but didn't hear or see any signs of a war party. Eager to return home and probably just tired of being cramped in a blockhouse, Copus decided it was safe enough to leave. A detachment of 9 soldiers accompanied the Copus family back to their cabin. When they got there, it appeared undisturbed. The soldiers stuck around for the night just in case. The Reverend's daughter, Nancy, claimed she saw a native in the woods but didn't report it, as she was afraid her father would just get angry and accuse her of crying wolf. The next morning on September 15th, 1812, 3 of the soldiers left their rifles leaning against the cabin and went to a nearby spring for a bath. A war party emerged from the woods and war whoops echoed among the trees. Privates George Shipley and John Petrick were quickly run down and killed. The 3rd soldier, Robert Warnock, was shot as he ran deeper into the woods and later died from his wounds. The war party began pummeling the Copus cabin with musket fire. Reverend Copus grabbed his rifle and opened the front door to return fire, but took a musket ball right through the chest. His wife and daughter helped him to his bed. He encouraged the soldiers to fight on and save his family. An hour later, Reverend James Copus was dead. The soldiers tore planks from the floor and used them to barricade any openings. 2 of the soldiers were wounded, and Nancy Copus was hit in the knee by a musket ball that penetrated the floor, but she survived. The fighting lasted until about 10 in the morning. When the war party got low on ammunition, they pulled out, shooting at the Copus family sheep on their way out. Now, the timeline of events gets a little hazy here. There was another victim of the Indian attacks named Levi Jones. He was a local shopkeeper who was attacked and scalped close to one of John Chapman's apple orchards. Some say he was targeted because he often sold alcohol to the people of Greentown, which brought all the problems that alcohol tends to bring. In some records, this is the first attack after the removal of the natives. In others, it doesn't happen until a year later in August of 1813. So the situation in Mansfield became desperate. There was still a war party at large, and threat of invasion from the north was still a possibility. There were only a few or no soldiers at all who could defend the settlers. They needed reinforcements, and needed them soon. A meeting was held at the blockhouse. It was decided that a messenger would be sent south to Mount Vernon, almost 30 miles away. They would have to travel overnight, which, with vengeful natives lurking about, who would volunteer for such a task? A soft but confident voice would ring from a group of weary pioneers. "I'll do it," said the voice. It was none other than Appleseed John Chapman. He was barefooted, wearing tattered clothes, and no, he did not have a tin pot on his head. Chapman knew the trails as well as the natives. By most accounts, Chapman seemed to get along with the natives, so if he crossed paths with them, they might let him go, seeing as he was a neutral party. Of course, no Native American accounts of Johnny Appleseed exist, but being friendly with them does fit his character. Either way, Chapman set out for Mount Vernon. Again, there are conflicting accounts of this run. In some versions, he made this run in 1812 in response to the Zimmer and Copus attacks. But the historical marker says August 1813, after Levi Jones was killed, so we'll go with that. Some say he borrowed a horse and rode through the night like Paul Revere, but here both say he ran barefoot because that's just more of a Johnny Appleseed thing to do. And most accounts say he was barefoot anyway. On the trail, he stopped at each cabin he came across and raised the alarm, shouting dramatic and often apocalyptic-like warnings. "Flee! Flee for your lives," he yelled. "The Indians are upon you." By the time the settlers opened the door to see what was going on, Chapman had already disappeared in the woods, off to the next cabin. Chapman reached Mount Vernon. His feet bloodied and bruised, but his feet usually looked like that anyway, according to the people who knew him. He raised the alarm to the militia, exclaiming that the Indians are burning and scalping up in Mansfield. Reinforcements were immediately dispatched. Some say Chapman ran all the way back that same night, with the soldiers trailing behind him. The mission was a success, and the troops arrived the next morning. All attacks in Mansfield ceased. In the summer of 1813, General William Henry Harrison held strong at Fort Meigs, and a few months later, Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry would defeat the British fleet on Lake Erie, securing Ohio for good. The Native American population in the Old Northwest was forced to move even more west of the Mississippi. After the Indian Removal Act of 1830, only the Wyandots remained in Upper Sandusky, Ohio, until 1842 when they moved to Oklahoma. As for John Chapman, he continued to do what he did best, grow apple trees and preach Swedenborgian mysticism. Both his gentleness and bravery fed into the legend of Johnny Appleseed. By 1822, the name John Appleseed began floating around. Eventually, Johnny Appleseed moved west into Indiana near Fort Wayne. He never married or had any children and believed he would find his soulmate in heaven if she didn't appear to him in this life. He owned quite a bit of property, but never flaunted wealth and didn't really seem to care much for money, instead living a frugal and simple life. He died March 18th, 1845, near Fort Wayne, Indiana, while staying with a friend. It's believed he caught pneumonia while walking barefoot in the cold. Today, across the Midwest, especially in Ohio and Indiana, Johnny Appleseed is celebrated through various festivals and events. One of them is in the form of a 5K run where participants can get a slight taste of what Chapman might have felt during his run to Mount Vernon, and perhaps enjoy some apple cider afterwards. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more forgotten American history and folklore. Take care.
Welcome back. You know, it's like I was saying in the beginning. What do these things all have in common? John Chapman was a lover of everyone, a lover of whites, a lover of natives, a lover of nature. And he had to get involved to keep the balance, to keep people safe, to go find those reinforcements that were needed to keep a community that he loved safe. He was a pacifist. He never carried a weapon. He never did harm to anyone. And it was very sad that so many people who just wanted to live and be happy got intertwined in such a terrible situation. Johnny lived a good life. He planted his apple orchards, and he helped a lot of people. And in reality, that pacifist who never picked up a weapon, who never hated a living creature, wound up saving more lives than you can imagine. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. God bless you, God love you, I do. And we'll see you out there.